Rinder.
Clever.
Compassionate.
Questioning.
Consultative.
Convincing.
Convicted. Rob Rinder. Malud, Maloud, Malive. Rob Rinder at Drive on Talk Radio.
This is Rob Rinder at Drive on Talk Radio with Skills for Life. Unlock your potential and learn the skills or get qualifications you need to get the job you want. Search Skills for Life, and wherever you are searching for that, please stay safe and look after yourself. Please don't go outside. It is windy and a little bit dangerous outside. Now, off stateside where there's no wind or bluster, it is, of course, our postcards from America with our own Prof. JC. How are you, my dear fellow, as we say in America?
Well, if you don't think there's any wind, my wife had to shut the flue because the fireplace behind me is roaring from wind.
Oh, really?
We've got 50-mile-an-hour winds coming through this chimney.
Well, you normally have much more dramatic weather than we do, but we've got 100-hour gusts coming our way. Now,
I know.
I'm going to go, well, which to us is a big weather deal. I know things are bigger in every sense on your side of the pond. It's very, very difficult to sort of understand or gauge the attitude, if you like, or the extent to which there's international coverage across America. And of course, it makes a difference according to where you are and what coast you're on. But to what extent is the Ukraine-Russia crisis being covered by the mainstream American media? And why do you think the Ukraine is important if you were to communicate this to the average American?
Well, it happens to be the oil prices go up.
Right.
If they cut the source of oil coming from Russia, we already have almost $5 a gallon of gas here for petrol, as you'd say,
Mm-hmm.
and our cost of living, our inflation is
Right.
going up almost 10%, which people are really concerned
Sure.
when it comes to their pocketbook.
Right.
That's how it affects people. The average Yank doesn't know Ukraine from Bosnia. And unfortunately, I've been to both, but the Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. But most Americans, unfortunately, don't know that until they hear about there could be a war, and no one is enamored with Putin, and they can see the news and they hear the news and they read. But when it really, Rob, when it really affects the dollars and cents of your life and the cost of living, that's where the Americans take heed.
Prof. JC, can I ask you, do you think that the fact that this is something which will be exactly as you describe, it's going to affect the, let's call it, average American? We think about, Madison, Wisconsin, the flyover states and so on and so forth, which makes them engage with this, that it's likely to drive them back into what you might describe as the Trump policy agenda. In other words, his entire platform was really not just about making America great again, but most importantly, to make America great by making it energy independent and fracking and so on and so forth. That is really the politics of the Republican right. Do you think looking at how fragile the world is likely to persuade those sorts of voters to say, to hell with the rest of the world, we need to make sure that we only rely on American energy, and the only party that's doing that is the Republican Party?
Well, the American energy means you're going to have to go get your oil from Texas and Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not getting the energy that we need because we're not developing the alternative sources of energy.
Right.
And unfortunately, for President Biden, who does want to develop those kinds of things, the Republicans are thwarting him on that. But Americans are concerned about war. We don't like to see our boys and girls coming home at the airport in Delaware, in body bags and in coffins. And an interesting thing, Rob, there's a conference going on in Munich with the vice president.
I'm going to stop you there because I want to ask you about that. I have to say, President Biden's speech made clear that the enemy isn't the Russian people, and that was a thoughtful speech to be sure. And I have to say, he spoke to the Russian people. I've had a number of Russian experts on. I listen to RT News myself in the language, and Putin does care. They do actually poll the Russian people, and it doesn't appear that the Russian people have any appetite for war. But I have to tell you, Prof. JC, and you'll know your history, the visual of a vice president going to have a meeting in Munich, which is the home of appeasement of Neville Chamberlain, is, I have to say, whatever the outcome of that discussion, strikes me as an ill-advised idea at best, right?
Well, she didn't choose Munich. However, Munich has, as far as Neville Chamberlain, who said I have assurances from Herr Chancellor Hitler.
Right.
And we know, and everyone who hasn't seen that, and I'm sure your audience and grannies have seen that, and grandpas have seen that.
Yeah.
When
It's
he
always
came
part
with
of our
the
history.
letter, he
Right?
says, I have it from Chancellor Hitler. It's called the Munich Pact.
That's right.
And this was with Hitler and Delisle, the Frenchman,
That's right.
and Mussolini
Right.
and Hitler. And he said, he has proved to me that he will not go into Czechoslovakia. What does that mean? And we're talking about Eastern Ukraine.
Right.
It's all history repeats itself. And there's a wonderful book that I recommend, if I may just jump in with it.
Yep.
There's a wonderful book by Barbara Tuchman. It's called The Guns of August.
Yeah.
And this is a book that President Kennedy recommended to Prime Minister Macmillan, because this brilliant woman has laid out how the heck we got into World War I and what were we thinking. And we are on the brink of another world war, and very possibly.
Yeah.
And then there's the second book, because I know you like quickly to mention another book, Paris 1919.
I know that book.
Which is about the Treaty of Versailles by Margaret.
And I think that's also a book about the long-term impact of that treaty and how
it has to do with that treaty,
right, and how it was
what we did to carve up the
right,
the
how we
world.
carved up the world, and eventually how that was, if you like, the most critical long-term cause. Perhaps you could argue that led that led to the Second World War. But I'm coming back to the modern day. The reason that that's a bad visual is because part of the discussion here, to say the very least, is that Putin is acting the way he is, partly because he's Putin, as we've discussed before, that he has long-term expansionist notions about the ex-Soviet Union and wanting to be a new Stalin or Tsar. There's that, to be sure. It's certainly not because he's seriously worried about NATO invading the Crimea and taking back any part of that peninsula. But there is something which is worrying, which is that he understands that the West is weak and likely to appease and not likely to stand up to dictators. And that, some may argue, is a price which is too high to pay, which is why people like Neville Chamberlain live in historical shame. And I wonder in those circumstances whether or not we are at the moment engaged in the type of appeasement that Neville Chamberlain, going back to that period of time, was engaged in. It's time that the West stood up and said there are clear red lines which you cannot and must not cross. And we need to have a collective voice and stand up to authoritarians like you.
Well, that's why at 4 o'clock our time, 9 o'clock yours, President is having a conference call with all the leaders, including the Prime Minister Boris Johnson as well, to discuss exactly the latest on Ukraine and update them, and they will update us on what is happening with Putin, who is deceiving and trying to slip and slide his way. In the meantime, there are 200,000 Russian troops on the borders of Belarus and Russia and Crimea. And what does that mean? I mean, just take a look at the map and you can understand it. This is going to be a frightful situation, and it's Putin's war, and he's the only one who can end it and just turn around and go back. Although he does have to go back to the Kremlin, and I wish him well there, because they're going to be gunning for him when he gets home.
Well, I wonder about that. Last question from the sublime to the deliciously absurd Prof. JC. You recommended some great films last week. I have to say I've had some great private feedback on your recommendations. You know, I always think that although we speak the same language, we don't necessarily share a cultural identity in the same way. So I'm always surprised when Americans like British humor. But I think you've got some films to recommend this week. Am I right that you love Carry On films?
Oh, I adore them. I adore the wacky, wonderful ribaldry that only the British can present. And I was a teen when I first saw this. When I first saw Charles Hawtrey, and I couldn't believe he was brilliant. And the other fellow, Sid James.
Sid James, yeah.
Infamy. They all have an infamy.
Yeah.
And the assortment of wonderful
What
gals.
about Kenneth Williams? I mean, he's really the legend.
Kenneth Williams.
Yeah.
They're outward and boldly broad as anyone could be. And Americans never saw that before. And I love Carry On, Nurse Carry On, Sergeant Carry On.
They're the great. I mean, I have to say they're probably not playable in this day and age. But before I go, Prof. JC, you know, I wonder whether or not you really get it. The only way of really understanding it, I think, is if you can do a good Kenneth Williams saying, "Ooh, matron." But before we go and leading into break, I wonder, Prof. JC, if you can give us an "Ooh, matron."
you, matron.
You've just made our day. Prof. JC, as ever, clear, fascinating, historical insight, great book recommendations, and gives us a sense of what's happening on that side of the pond. Listen to Prof. JC and follow him on Twitter. This is Rob Rinder, and you're listening to Talk Radio.
Bold Talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.